Welcome to the Discourse Analyzer AI Toolkit, where articles come alive. You're listening to the audio version of our article. For the full text and an interactive experience, check out the link in the description below. Interact with any selection using our AI assistant to enhance your understanding. Let's explore.
Consumer perceptions in discourse analysis. Interactive assistant consumer perceptions refer to how consumers interpret, evaluate, and respond to brands, products, or services based on the language and messaging they encounter. These perceptions are shaped by advertising, marketing communications, public relations, and even user-generated content like reviews and social media posts. In discourse analysis, consumer perceptions are studied to understand how language influences and reflects consumers' attitudes, beliefs, and buying behaviors. Discourse analysis examines how consumers make sense of brand messages, how they interpret product claims, and how they engage with brands through the discourse they encounter in various media. Discourse analysis of consumer perceptions focuses on the language used by brands to frame their products and the ways consumers interpret and respond to these messages. This includes analyzing the linguistic strategies that companies use to construct positive images of their products, as well as how consumers express their experiences, satisfaction, or dissatisfaction in reviews, forums, and social media. By studying the discourse around consumer brand interactions, researchers can uncover the underlying values, desires, and concerns that drive consumer behavior. Key features of consumer perceptions in discourse analysis. 1. Framing and brand messaging. Framing refers to the way brands present their products or services to shape consumer perceptions. Discourse analysis looks at how language is used to frame products in a way that highlights their benefits, differentiates them from competitors, or appeals to consumer desires. Example: a skincare brand might frame its products as scientifically advanced by using language like, clinically proven to reduce wrinkles in just 2 weeks. Discourse analysis would examine how this language frames the product as effective and backed by science, influencing consumer perceptions of trust and efficacy. 2. Consumer identity and brand affiliation. Brands often construct messages that appeal to consumers' identities and desires for affiliation with certain lifestyles or values. Discourse analysis investigates how consumers interpret these messages and how they relate to their sense of identity or belonging. Example: a high-end fashion brand might use language like, for those who demand the best, to appeal to consumers who identify with luxury and exclusivity. Discourse analysis would explore how this language targets specific consumer identities and how consumers who value status and quality perceive the brand as aligning with their self-image. 3. Rhetorical strategies in advertising. In advertisements, brands use rhetorical strategies to persuade consumers to view their products positively. Discourse analysis looks at how language appeals to logic, logos, emotion, pathos, or credibility, ethos, to shape consumer perceptions. Example: a car advertisement might use ethos by stating, voted car of the year by industry experts, appealing to authority and credibility. Discourse analysis would examine how this language builds trust and influences consumer perceptions of the car as reliable and highly regarded by professionals. 4. Consumer feedback and reviews. Consumers frequently express their perceptions through reviews, social media posts, or feedback, providing insight into how they interpret brand messages and their experiences with products or services. Discourse analysis explores how consumers frame their satisfaction or dissatisfaction and how they use language to express these attitudes. Example: a dissatisfied customer might leave a review stating, the product didn't live up to the hype, poor quality for the price, using evaluative language to express disappointment. Discourse analysis would focus on how this language reflects the gap between consumer expectations and actual experiences, shaping future consumer perceptions of the brand. 5. Cultural context and consumer interpretation. Consumer perceptions are often influenced by the broader cultural context in which messages are received. Discourse analysis investigates how cultural values, trends, or social movements shape the way consumers interpret brand messages. Example: a brand that markets itself as sustainable may resonate differently depending on the cultural context. In regions where environmental concerns are prioritized, consumers might perceive the brand as socially responsible and desirable. Discourse analysis would explore how cultural factors influence the reception and interpretation of messages, revealing differences in consumer perceptions across contexts. 6. Power dynamics in consumer brand relationships. Discourse analysis also examines the power dynamics between consumers and brands, focusing on how consumers use language to challenge or reinforce brand authority. This can be seen in consumer activism, boycotts, or viral campaigns where consumers collectively push back against brands. Example: during a public relations crisis, consumers might use social media to call out a company for unethical practices, saying things like, "Boycott this brand, they don't care about the environment." Discourse analysis would examine how consumers use language to challenge brand authority and influence public perception, shifting the power dynamic from the company to the consumer. 7. Emotional appeals and consumer engagement. Brands often use emotional appeals to engage consumers, prompting them to feel a particular way about a product or service. Discourse analysis focuses on how language is used to evoke emotions such as happiness, nostalgia, or fear, shaping consumer perceptions and driving engagement. Example: an insurance company might use phrases like, "protect what matters most," to evoke feelings of security and responsibility. Discourse analysis would explore how the emotional appeal influences consumer perceptions of the brand as trustworthy and caring, encouraging consumers to engage with the company's services. Methods for analyzing consumer perceptions in discourse. 1. Critical discourse analysis, CDA. Critical discourse analysis, CDA, is used to examine how consumer perceptions are shaped by broader societal structures, ideologies, and power relations. CDA explores how brands use language to construct consumer identities and desires, and how consumers may accept, resist, or negotiate these constructions. Example: a CDA of beauty product advertisements might reveal how brands perpetuate certain beauty standards through language that emphasizes perfection, flawlessness, and youth. The analysis would focus on how this discourse influences consumer perceptions of beauty and creates pressure to conform to idealized standards. 2. Frame analysis. Frame analysis investigates how products, services, or brand messages are framed in ways that influence consumer perceptions. This method focuses on how certain aspects of a product are emphasized while others are downplayed to shape how consumers interpret the brand. Example: a fast food chain might frame its new menu as wholesome and healthy, focusing on fresh ingredients while minimizing discussion of calorie counts. Frame analysis would examine how this framing influences consumer perceptions of the brand as offering healthier options, even if the nutritional content remains high. 3. Narrative analysis. Narrative analysis looks at how brands construct stories around their products, and how consumers engage with these stories. This method focuses on the role of storytelling in shaping consumer perceptions and creating emotional connections with brands. Example: a coffee brand might tell the story of its ethical sourcing practices, using language like, "Our farmers are paid fairly, and each cup you drink helps build a better future." Narrative analysis would explore how this story shapes consumer perceptions of the brand as ethical and socially responsible, influencing purchasing decisions. 4. Sentiment analysis. Sentiment analysis examines the emotional tone of consumer-generated discourse, such as reviews, social media posts, or feedback, to assess how consumers feel about a brand or product. This method often uses both qualitative and quantitative techniques to understand consumer attitudes. Example: an analysis of online reviews for a new phone might reveal a mix of sentiments like, "great value for money," and "disappointing battery life." Discourse analysis would focus on how consumers express their opinions and how these sentiments influence broader consumer perceptions of the product. Examples of consumer perceptions in discourse analysis. Example 1. Brand messaging and consumer trust. A pharmaceutical company might use language like, "trusted by doctors worldwide," in its advertisements to build credibility and trust with consumers. Discourse analysis would explore how this message frames the brand as reliable and trustworthy, influencing consumer perceptions of the company as authoritative and dependable. Example 2. Negative consumer reviews. A consumer might leave a negative review for an online retailer, writing, "The customer service was terrible. No one helped me with my issue, and I won't be shopping here again." Discourse analysis would examine how the language expresses dissatisfaction, how the review might influence other consumers' perceptions, and how the brand might respond to mitigate the damage. Example 3. Cultural resonance in brand campaigns. A global fashion brand might launch a campaign with the slogan, "Empower your individuality," aiming to resonate with consumers in cultures that value self-expression. Discourse analysis would investigate how consumers in different regions interpret this message, focusing on whether the brand's language aligns with local cultural values and how it influences brand perception. Example 4. Social media activism and brand perception. A clothing brand might face backlash on social media after being accused of unethical labor practices. Consumers might post comments like, "Stop exploiting workers. We deserve better from this brand." Discourse analysis would focus on how consumers use language to challenge the brand's ethical claims and reshape public perception, potentially leading to changes in consumer behavior. Example 5. Emotional appeals in marketing. A travel company might use emotional appeals with language like, "Create unforgettable memories with the ones you love," to evoke feelings of nostalgia and connection. Discourse analysis would explore how this language influences consumer perceptions of the brand as offering meaningful experiences, encouraging engagement and loyalty. Challenges in analyzing consumer perceptions through discourse. 1. Diverse consumer interpretations. Different consumers interpret brand messages in various ways based on their individual backgrounds, values, and experiences. Discourse analysts must account for this diversity in interpretation, which can make it difficult to generalize findings across all consumers. 2. Changing cultural contexts. Consumer perceptions are influenced by the cultural context in which brand messages are received. As cultural values and trends shift, brands may need to adjust their language, and discourse analysts must be attuned to these changes when analyzing consumer perceptions. 3. Multimodal communication. Brands use a variety of communication modes, text, visuals, videos, and sound, to shape consumer perceptions. Discourse analysts must consider how these different modes work together and how language interacts with other elements of branding to create a cohesive message. Conclusion. Consumer perceptions are shaped by the language and messaging strategies used by brands, as well as by how consumers interpret and respond to these messages. Through discourse analysis, researchers can uncover how brands construct their identities, frame their products, and engage with consumers, while also examining how consumers express their attitudes, satisfaction or dissatisfaction with brands. By analyzing the linguistic and rhetorical strategies used in advertising, reviews, social media, and corporate communication, discourse analysis reveals the underlying factors that influence consumer perceptions and drive consumer behavior. Understanding the role of language in shaping consumer perceptions offers valuable insights for brands seeking to build trust, loyalty, and engagement with their audiences. Frequently asked questions. What is the focus of discourse analysis in consumer perceptions? Discourse analysis in consumer perceptions examines how language shapes and reflects how consumers interpret, respond to, and engage with brand messaging. This includes how advertisements, reviews, and public relations shape consumer attitudes and behavior. How does framing influence consumer perceptions? Framing involves presenting a product or message in a way that highlights specific aspects to shape consumer interpretation. For example, using phrases like "clinically proven" in skincare ads frames a product as scientifically effective, impacting consumer trust. What role do consumer identities play in brand messaging? Brands use language to resonate with specific consumer identities or lifestyles. For instance, luxury brands might use language such as, "for those who demand the best," to appeal to status-conscious consumers. Discourse analysis investigates how consumers relate to these messages based on their own identities. How do rhetorical strategies in advertising shape perceptions? Brands use rhetorical appeals, logos, ethos, pathos, to persuade consumers. An ad that states, "voted best by experts," appeals to credibility, ethos, influencing consumers to see the product as reliable. Discourse analysis looks at how these strategies impact consumer trust and perceptions. How do consumer reviews provide insights into perceptions? Reviews reflect consumer satisfaction or dissatisfaction and reveal how consumers interpret brand promises. Discourse analysis of reviews uncovers the language consumers use to express their experiences and how this influences the brand's reputation. What is the importance of cultural context in consumer perceptions? Cultural values influence how consumers interpret brand messages. For instance, a sustainable brand may be seen positively in eco-conscious cultures but might be less impactful in regions where sustainability is not a priority. Discourse analysis explores these cultural nuances in consumer interpretation. How are power dynamics evident in consumer brand discourse? Power dynamics can shift when consumers collectively challenge brands, such as through social media activism or viral campaigns. Discourse analysis examines how consumers use language to challenge brand authority and reshape public perception. What role do emotional appeals play in consumer engagement? Brands use language to evoke emotions, such as nostalgia or security, to engage consumers. For example, "Protect what matters most" in insurance ads appeals to consumers' desire for safety. Discourse analysis studies how such emotional language drives consumer connection and loyalty. What methods are used to analyze consumer perceptions in discourse analysis? Critical discourse analysis, CDA, explores how brand language reflects societal ideologies and power. Frame analysis examines how brand messages are framed to influence perception. Narrative analysis investigates brand stories and their impact on consumer connections. Sentiment analysis assesses consumer attitudes in reviews and social media posts to gauge emotional responses. Can discourse analysis help brands improve their consumer engagement? Yes, by understanding how consumers interpret and respond to language, brands can refine their messaging to better align with consumer values, enhance trust, and foster loyalty. Discourse analysis provides insights into effective communication strategies and consumer expectations.